There's a man sitting across a conference table. He's calm, almost unnervingly calm. The deal on the table could collapse his company. Hundreds of jobs, years of work, and he's smiling, not because he doesn't understand the gravity, but because his brain is doing something most people's brains simply cannot do under that kind of pressure. This video is about that brain. Most people assume businessmen are successful because they are ruthless or lucky or born into the right rooms. That's the popular story. Greed plus opportunity equals empire. And sure, some of that is real, but that story misses something far more interesting. The research says the defining edge of elite business cognition isn't aggression or ambition. It's a set of deeply trained psychological mechanisms that most people never develop, mechanisms that literally change how reality is perceived, processed, and acted upon. By the end of this, the businessman in someone's life, a boss, a parent, a partner, will make a different kind of sense. Not as a caricature, as a human being running a very specific kind of operating system. Here's what's coming. The cognitive skill that makes businessmen almost immune to bad news. The psychological paradox that makes them trust their gut while secretly running calculations most people never consciously run. And then the one finding that genuinely unsettled researchers when they first discovered it, because it suggested something about successful business minds that felt almost inhuman. Start here. Experienced businessmen process uncertainty differently than almost any other professional group studied. Not just tolerate it, process it differently at a neurological level. Psychologist Paul Slovik's research on risk perception showed that experts in high-stakes fields develop something called affect-rich numeracy, the ability to hold emotional and statistical information simultaneously, rather than having one override the other. Most people, when scared, stop calculating. Fear hijacks the prefrontal cortex and the numbers stop mattering. An experienced businessman in crisis stays in dual processing. The feeling and the data coexist. Picture a retail chain owner in 2020. Stores shutting down. Revenue at zero. The fear is real. The mortgage on those leases is very real. But instead of freezing, the brain immediately pattern matches to every prior contraction it's survived, every negotiation it's navigated, every creditor conversation it's ever had. The fear becomes data, not noise. That's not coldness. That's a trained cognitive structure. And it matters enormously in how these people come across to others. Someone watching from the outside sees a person who seems unbothered by catastrophe. They call it sociopathy. What they're actually seeing is affect-rich numeracy doing its job. But here's where it gets genuinely strange. Research on expert intuition, Kahneman and Klein's work on naturalistic decision-making, found that elite decision-makers in business often know the right answer before they can explain why. They call it a gut feeling, and for decades this was dismissed as folk psychology. Mysticism dressed up in a suit. It isn't. What's actually happening is pattern recognition at a speed that bypasses conscious articulation. Klein called this recognition-primed decision-making. The brain compares the current situation to thousands of stored scenarios, finds the closest match, and generates a recommendation, all before the conscious mind has finished reading the room. There's a classic study Klein ran with chess grandmasters. Show a grandmaster a mid-game board for 5 seconds, then remove it. They can reconstruct it almost perfectly. Show a beginner the same board, they remember almost nothing. But here's the critical part. Scramble the pieces into a random, non-game configuration, and the grandmaster's recall drops to the beginner's level. They weren't memorizing positions. They were reading meaning. Elite businessmen do this with markets, people, and deals. A founder walks into a pitch meeting and within minutes gets an inexplicable read on whether the partnership will work. It's not magic. It's compressed pattern libraries built over years, running silently in the background, surfacing as instinct. The dangerous part, sometimes those pattern libraries are wrong. Sometimes the confident gut instinct is a cached answer from a completely different situation, misapplied to a new one. This is where successful businessmen fail, quietly, confidently, and completely unnecessarily. Which brings in something that doesn't get talked about enough. There's a cognitive pattern called regulatory focus theory, work developed by psychologist E. Torrey Higgins at Columbia. It describes two fundamental motivational orientations: promotion focus, which is about pursuing gains and growth, and prevention focus, which is about avoiding losses and protecting what exists. Most successful businessmen operate in a dominant promotion focus. They're wired toward the upside. This makes them visionary, energizing, magnetic to talent. It also makes them systematically underweight risk. They don't see the danger clearly, not because they're stupid, but because their cognitive lens is literally tuned to the prize, not the cliff. And the people around them, the CFOs, the operations directors, the cautious co-founders, are often running a stronger prevention focus. And those people get dismissed as negative, as not having the stomach for it, as people who don't get the vision. Some of the most spectacular business collapses in history followed this exact pattern. Not fraud, not incompetence, a visionary brain that genuinely could not perceive the cliff because it was too focused on the horizon. Now the thing that researchers found genuinely unsettling. Studies on decision fatigue, Roy Baumeister's work on ego depletion, showed that willpower and decision-making quality both degrade after sustained mental effort. This is universal. Judges give harsher rulings before lunch. Doctors prescribe more passively at the end of a shift. Successful businessmen know this about themselves and build their entire operating environment around it. The famous pattern of wearing the same outfit every day, scheduling the hardest decisions in the morning, delegating everything that doesn't require the highest functioning version of their brain, that's not personality quirk. That's deliberate cognitive resource management. But the unsettling finding wasn't that they're disciplined about it. It's the implication underneath. These people have developed an almost architectural relationship with their own minds. They don't just think, they study how they think. They track when they think well. They engineer the conditions for peak cognition, the way an athlete engineers recovery. The average person experiences their mental state as something that happens to them,